Let us pray. O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Ministry was a third career for me. I first heard the call when I was 9 years old, too young to really know what it meant, and just old enough to know that I was being formed by the stories of faithful people I heard at church. At 21, though, when I might have been heading off to seminary, I was instead getting divorced from an ill-advised marriage. I was also exploring the world of business as a real estate market consultant. I met my husband, Tom, while I was healing from divorce. I guess you could say that he and I grew up together. Marriage, a house, children, and a business came along, and those things consumed most of our time and attention, no time for seminary. Tom supported me while I parented for a while, and then I worked with Tom in building his inspection business. And during those years, Tom used to accuse me of being more of a social worker than a manager. At church, people kept mistaking me for the pastor. Still, I ignored this sense of call like it was a jury summons. I just took it and hid it away in a drawer. But it would not go away. When my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer and then died, grief forced me into God's arms. And a year later, my own diagnosis of breast cancer left me with time, nothing but time, to listen to what my heart had been murmuring. My own pastor, the Reverend Norma Lee Barnhart, encouraged me to take that summons out of the drawer and respond to it. So when I first came to St. Paul's to work, it was to fulfill a requirement from Chicago Theological Seminary to complete an internship. St. Paul's was, for me, the tall steeple church, the one with the big pipe organ and the large choir. I had been inside this sanctuary for meetings of the Chicago Metropolitan Association, and my children and I had served dinner for the Lincoln Park Community Shelter. But I had never been tempted to worship here. This church was just too big for me. When I first met Tom Henry and Randy Deckworth and Carol Monroe Mosley on an interview for that internship, I told them that I brought with me a prejudice against big church. The question I brought with me to challenge them was, how can a large church, a large congregation like this, be faithful to Jesus' summons, to welcome strangers, to care for the poor, to nurture widows and orphans, to work for the coming of the kingdom on earth? Well, they looked me in the eye and challenged me right back. Come on board and find out. It helped that when I came, it was an opportune time for the entire pastoral staff. They were all due sabbatical time, and they were very happy to have me take over some of their responsibilities while they went away. So in September of 1997, I was invited into the swirl of activity that is St. Paul's United Church of Christ. Some of my first assignments were great for an introvert: to write short prayers for the bulletin — we used to have those on the prayer page — and to send out birthday cards. So I began to learn the names of the people here even before I knew your faces. And some of my assignments seemed pretty overwhelming. Someone had called the church with a request for a pastor to officiate a funeral. It wasn't someone who currently attended church here, but someone who had been baptized here and moved away long ago, I learned that St. Paul's connections run deep and definitely bring people back to church in times of life transition. The pastors kindly gave that funeral to me. With the book of worship in hand, I set out to learn how to comfort those who mourn, even when you don't know them. I got wonderful support from Tom and Randy and Carol. I really loved the staff meetings. From the beginning, I learned to love the humor that occurred at those meetings. I also learned that a lot of pastoral ministry has to do with how to manage the building and the parking lot, and what kind of cookies to put out at coffee hour. As I participated in worship and committee meetings, though, one concern kept rising to the surface over and over again, and that was how important being open and affirming was to this congregation. St. Paul's had voted itself ONA in the early 1980s because it was an expression of what was already going on here. It was an expression of your living faith. And our reputation as the 13th church in the United Church of Christ to become ONA continues to be a source of pride for us. We still provide hospitality for many folks in the LGBTQ community who have felt orphaned by church. I was new here when the Chicago Coalition of Welcoming Churches was born out of that commitment, out of our welcome. We began marching in the Pride Parade annually at that time, and this will be the first time in about 19 years that I have not marched in the Pride Parade. Our ONA welcome extended into the community here in the city, and soon we answered the summons to encourage other churches to become ONA also. With Rick Peterson, I went to meetings of the Chicago Metropolitan Association and the Illinois Conference of the UCC. Rick wrote and got support to bring a resolution to declare the conference open and affirming, open to all, regardless of sexual orientation. Some of the meetings leading up to that got pretty contentious. Rick and I testified on behalf of St. Paul's about our congregation's experience of being a congregation that cared for those in the LGBTQ community. And we mixed up the letters, GLBT, whatever. And ultimately, the conference did vote affirmatively, and so now all of the UCC in the northern part of Illinois is ONA. I want to lift up just one example, though, for you of how that welcome has played out here in this congregation. I'm going to share with you the story of someone that not many of you may know, the story of Linda Lockwood. Linda began coming here when life was good for her. She had a master's in library science and worked for a large law firm in their research department. But when legal research was transformed by technology, Linda lost her job, and she was unable to replace it. Her economic underpinnings began slipping away, and she was forced to work in retail, so she wasn't here many Sunday mornings. She was at Macy's. She moved into a tiny single room with a bathroom at the end of a hall. It had no kitchen, just a microwave, a refrigerator, and a hot pot. It was kind of like a dorm, but without the camaraderie. Still, she soldiered on, pouring herself into caring for her animals, her cats in particular. And then Linda developed cancer. She reached out to the church at that point, and she told us that she lived for her cats. So when Linda's last cat died, her health deteriorated rapidly. the cancer had come back. Desperate and alone, she turned to us again, and very quietly, a group of angels gathered round her. They formed a net below her. The GLBT brunch group made calls on her. Connectors sent her cards and kept her in prayer. Individuals took over for her and moved her out of her little apartment and into a nursing home. We became Linda's family because she had none. I was her healthcare power of attorney, and unfortunately, the day she died, I was out of town. Thank goodness for cell phones and texting. When her doctor called me to say that she thought it was time to recognize her do not resuscitate order, I was able to reach out to Pastor Jeff, and he went to the hospital and prayed with her, and less than an hour later, I got the call from her doctor. She had fallen gracefully into the loving arms of God. Who in this big church remembers Linda? Not many people, but yes, I see the hands. There weren't a lot of people, but we still gathered in the courtyard there at the memorial garden for a memorial service. We prayed, and then we drank a toast to Linda. It was Starbucks white chocolate latte. That was the drink she had requested we sneak into the nursing home during those final weeks. And we shared stories, and I forgot to bring him, but I have Grumpy Cat, a stuffed animal in my office that was hers. Grumpy Cat was there watching on as we poured Linda's ashes into the memorial garden, along with the ashes of her cat. We had found them in her belongings as we cleaned out her apartment. There was no template for this kind of caring except the template left us by our Christian ancestors in faith and what we made up as we went along. All we knew was that St. Paul's care for Linda at the end of her life grew out of our commitment to follow Jesus' summons. Linda is only one example of someone without family who's been adopted and cared for by the faithful at St. Paul's. It's been my privilege to work alongside you, caring for the widows and widowers and the orphans of all ages. And then there are the children. In 1999, I was asked to devote my intern hours to the children's ministry at St. Paul's. I'm not sure a lot of you remember that. But after that year, it was decided that that ministry was so important that we should commit a staff person to it. And that wasn't going to be me. That's when we called Sharon Phillips to come on board as youth ed director. I've had the privilege, though, to bless and baptize so many of the children that I see out here in the congregation now. There's not time to relate all those stories, but I'll reflect on just one. I don't know if you know Greta and Maria Schmall. They're teenagers now, and they don acolyte robes and light the candles many mornings during the school year. I remember visiting their mom, Kimberly, when she was on bed rest, trying to keep those twins from being born too soon. Before our visit ended, I invited Kimberly to pray, and I asked her if I could touch her belly. And with her permission, I laid hands on it, and I felt those two girls squirm and kick, even before they took their first breath out in the world. It's really remarkable to see them here Sunday after Sunday, because did you know they come all the way from Indiana to go to church at St. Paul's? That's how deep our faith runs. In just 10 days, I'll be officiating the wedding of our daughter, Coco Corbett, in Corbett, Oregon. I don't know how that happened, but it did. I think I can do it without breaking down into tears because I've had the privilege of officiating at hundreds of weddings at St. Paul's. Weddings for church members, of course, but many weddings for those who've come here without a church of their own. Standing up there with each couple, asking the questions of intent, listening to them repeat their vows, declaring them married in the eyes of the church and state, of family and friends, inviting them to kiss publicly. Every wedding is like being present at a new creation, a creation that rolls back the forces of death that stalk our world. Weddings, when I first got here, I was told weddings are a ministry at St. Paul's, and I can say yes, they are. Weddings are a ministry at St. Paul's just as much as writing letters to our legislators to have them support a budget for the state of Illinois. This is all the kinds of ministry that I have been privileged to do alongside you while I'm here. And when I'm no longer with you, I'll miss all of this. The rituals in worship, the visits, even those long, interminable meetings. What I take with me are memories. Memories of the many ways the question that I brought to that initial interview has been answered. This big church is a faithful church, doing together as community far more than any of us can do individually, trying to live out a good life. Today, I echo Paul's words. I thank God for you. Thank you, though, doesn't seem like enough. It doesn't express my deep gratitude for the privilege of standing with you in ordinary yet very sacred spaces so many times, listening to you as you struggled with your own summons, celebrating with you at reaching fundraising goals to start new ministries and new community services. As Barbara Brown Taylor says in that quote, "The thought for preparation," this hasn't been hard at all. Most of my ministry has been so full of pleasure that there's no need to complicate it by making it theological or calling it holy. I can't go, though, without remembering all the times I've stood before you asking you to pray with me for those listed on the prayer page. Every time we do that, we allow ourselves to be used by God's power to bring comfort, healing, and wholeness to those who can't do it for themselves. So today I want to push you a little bit to reach just a bit further in prayer than you've ever done before. This is also my last attempt to close that loop on that question that I came here with 20 years ago. Since I came, I've learned that this large church has a way of following Christ that is and has been ever so powerful and effective throughout its history, and I marvel at that, given that so many of you don't know each other. Look around you. How many people around you do you actually know in the pews? I've asked sometimes, well, do you know so-and-so? And people will say, no, I don't know them. And so I want to challenge you today to get to know each other just a little bit better. I want to invite you to use prayer to do that. So if you look in your bulletin, you should have a blank piece of paper stuck in there somewhere. And in your pew racks in front of you, there are some pencils if you don't have a pen with you. And we're going to do this experiment now. So I want you to take that piece of paper, and I want you to write down a prayer request for yourself. It could be a joy a celebration you want to share in prayer. It could be a petition for something that you really need prayer for. Write it down and then sign your name. And when you've done that, and even those of you who are visiting, I'm asking you to do this, yes? When you've done that, I want you to look around and look past the people you already know and find someone you don't know and give them your prayer request, and you take theirs. Okay, is it written down? Who needs more time? Okay, a little more time. The choir, you're going to have a hard time with this. Yes. Okay, when you've got that done, now look for somebody you don't know and exchange prayer requests. We'll give you a couple of minutes. You can get up and walk around if you need to. I notice for some of you that's harder than it is for others. That's great. Thank you, everybody, for playing along. And now the next time you come back to church, look for that person and share how it was for you to pray for them and to know that you were being prayed for. And then you'll have someone else in the congregation that you know. Thank you very much. I'm done now. I'm done. You know, St. Paul's is the only church I've... Even though I said I'm done, I've got a few more things to say. This is the only church I've ever served as a pastor, and so you've completely spoiled me. I have to retire. I can't go anywhere else. It'll never be the same. I have a hard time saying goodbye, so I needed some help, and I got that help when I had lunch with Betty and Bruce Voice. Bruce and Betty do a lot of the ushering here and have for years. I've known them for a very long time. I took them out a couple weeks ago to celebrate their 29th wedding anniversary, so congratulate them. Bruce is someone who knows a lot of people. He's ushered in St. Paul's for most of his adult life. And if you don't know Bruce and Betty, you need to introduce yourselves to them. Betty sits in a wheelchair out here, and Bruce is back right there. See, there he is in the back. Anyhow, when we were having lunch, Bruce said to me, "This is not goodbye, it's only hasta la vista." It's only until we see you again, until I see you again. Keep on learning to know each other. Keep on caring for one another and doing good works in the world. Keep on listening to that internal summons to deepen your personal faith and your public witness of love and compassion in the world. And I promise that I will pray for you all. Amen.